Hey guys, in this section, I want to talk about nested loops. Now, nested loops are nothing more than loops within loops. So what happens is that we have a loop. So I'm going to declare a loop that counts up until 5. And then inside here, we would have another loop. So what does that do? Now, let's test it out. What I want to do is, okay, I'm going to call this one J because we've already defined I. And what I want to do is print out another loop of numbers within this loop. So the first iteration will print out a certain number of loops. The second iteration will print out a certain number of, a certain times of loops, if I'm saying that correctly, or a certain number of iterations within this iteration. So let me show you what I'm talking about, so it's not too confusing. This one will also count to 5. Sorry, I meant J. And then we're going to increment J. And then what we want to do here is print out this I. I want to show you what's going to happen, and then I'll explain it to you so that you don't get a little lost. So what we have here is 0, 0, 0, 0. And then we have 1 5 times, 2 5 times, 3 5 times, and 4 5 times. So every number in this loop, in this iteration, is printed out 5 times. Why is that? Because of this guy here. We have told Java that we want to print out this guy 5 times, but at each iteration, we want to print out I this amount of times, 5 times. So it depends on how much we iterate in this loop, that I will be printed out that many times. Just try to wrap your head around that, and I'm sure it's not too confusing, but yeah, it is confusing. I understand if you do feel like it's confusing, but if you don't feel like you're confused, then good for you. Now we're gonna print out J just to see how things will work. And here we get 0 1 2 3 4, and then we get 0 1 2 3 4 again, and then we get 0 1 2 3 4 5 times. It all happens 5 times because now we're printing out J, right? So what's happening is, let me bring this close. What happens is, at the first iteration, it prints out 0 1 2 3 4 because of this iteration. And then at the second iteration of this outer loop, the inner loop does its execution, prints out J 0 1 2 3 4, and then same thing happens for X amount of times. So that's basically loops are, inner loops, nested loops are quite useful. I'm just going to show you this is one of the famous programs in Java. So they would want you to print out something like this. Otherwise, okay, they would want you to print out something like, let me use an X. So this is one of the famous programs in Java. They want you to print out something like this. Usually they use an asterisk, but I'm not going to use it here because of this documentation over here. It's going to be a little bit confusing. But anyway, I'm using an X, the X symbol, or the X alphabet. So they want you to print out something like this. How would you do that without saying, let me just erase this. How would you do that without saying system.out.println X and then doing the same thing on the second line and printing out XX and then 3 X's on the third line? So how would you do that? You would use a nested loop. And then, okay, let's say we want it to happen 5 times. So starting at I, while I is less than 5. And then we increment I. And then in here, we would have another loop. And here, we would declare this as J. While, okay, this one will be equal to 0, while J is less than I. while j is less than I, because remember, we want to print out, what we want to do at this time is print out x depending on the amount of times that, or like the amount of numbers we have at this particular index of I. So we're going to say j plus plus, and then I'm going to print out x here, just like that. Now it's not going to work the way that we expected, but I want to show you what's going to happen. So here we just get x's. What we want to do is print out x, 1x, 2x's, 3x's, and so on. So what happens is, at the 0th iteration, nothing happens because it's 0. And then at the first iteration, let me just change this to 1 instead. Yeah, and then we're going to say less than or equal to 5, just to avoid confusion. And I'm going to run this again. It's going to do the exact same thing, by the way. So not the exact same thing. I'm going to begin this guy at 1 as well. So what happens is, we're printing this one out and then we're getting this line. We don't want that. Now, instead of making it go to the next line, we can make it go horizontally by using print instead of print ln. So that's another thing in Java that you can use. I'm going to run this. Now it's printing out all of these symbols like that. Now we want, after each iteration, to print out the next line, to go to the next line. We want to print, after the first iteration, we want to print that, and then at the second iteration, we want it to print on the next line. So here we would system.out.print line. Now this will take it to the next line because of this print ln. Now we're going to run that and we get our program just as we expected it. Now, how is this happening? The first iteration, when I is equal to 1, what happens is this counts up until I, of which I is 1, right? So it's going to print out x 1 time, Then we move on to the second iteration. Now I is equal to 2. So it's going to loop 2 times because I is equal to 2. And it's going to print it out here. And then the third iteration, it does the exact same thing and it prints it out down here. And the same thing for the fourth iteration. So that's how this goes. That's how this goes. Hopefully it's not too confusing, and try to wrap your head around it. Hope you enjoyed this. And before we move on to the next lecture, I wanted to work with arrays, but I'm just going to talk about them on the next lecture anyway. So have fun. I wanted to introduce matrices, like a matrix, another form of arrays, but we're going to talk about them on the next lecture. So hope you enjoyed this lesson. Please leave a like and subscribe. If you don't understand, keep watching. Hopefully you will understand. Keep practicing, and have a nice day.